as Mark said, I'm a remodeling contractor. I've been a remodeling contractor for 31 years. For probably the first 20, 22 years of that, I was part of the problem. We called ourselves green, but it was kind of a faith-based sustainability because we didn't measure anything. There was no accountability. If you don't measure the impact of the work you do, it's very difficult to be accountable for it. You have no idea how you're doing. You need some sort of scorekeeping mechanism. So we did a massive addition to a massive house in a western suburb of Boston. And at the end, we had to increase the size of the electrical panel from 100 amps to 400 amps. But we did it all in a very green way. But at the end of the project, my crew kind of looked at me and said, what have we just done? You know, that's going to be there for a very long time. So we've gotten very serious about the numbers. And my role is to spend just about 15 minutes here to make sure that we all have sort of a common basic numeracy about energy and about energy in buildings and the context for that. This is kind of uncomfortable. Does this work? All right, great. So I grew up in Iowa. I love going back to Iowa. I love the Iowa State Fair because they put every single foodstuff there is on a stick and deep fat fry it. You'll note that the ambulance there is next to the Iowa pork tent. So this is me with guess what that is? Corn dog. Oh no, this is a deep fat fried Milky Way. And there's a picture of me actually eating it, but Mark said I shouldn't use that because too many in the audience would find it disturbing. That's my daughter looking, anyway. So we can take, the point I want to make with this slide is that we can convert all kinds of energy to common units. In Newton, the average Newton house uses energy equivalent to a layer 2 deep of deep fat fried Milky Ways on every square foot of the house. So that's one unit, deep fat fried Milky Ways. But for the most part, we think in terms of kilowatt hours, therms, gallons of fuel oil. And you can take all the different sources of energy that a house uses or a building uses, convert it to a common unit. We often use BTUs in the trade. And get what's called an operational rating. So you take all the sources of energy your house uses or your building uses, convert it to BTUs using various formula, add it all up, divide by the square footage of finished space, living space, and you get a crude but effective scoring mechanism, BTU per square foot per year. So I did a bunch of houses. And this data I haven't updated it in a couple of years, but it's still pretty current for representative homes in metropolitan Boston. You see we're at about 60,000 BTU per square foot, which is part of the problem. I mean, that's not getting us anywhere near the goal we need, but it's something to be aware of where you stand. This is site energy. So there's a difference between source energy and site energy, and that's the next concept I need to introduce. So we have source energy over on the left, site energy on the right. The difference between source energy and site energy is the amount of energy required to get energy to your building. For instance, generating electricity. You see that yellow box, electricity generation, that's in the middle of the top. You see there's a number of inputs, coal, natural gas, nuclear, hydro, and then there's outputs. There's 2 bars. So there's multiple bars going in, there's 2 bars coming out, the gray one and the tan one. The tan one is usable energy, the gray one is wasted energy. Generating electricity with turbines on a grid-wide scale is very wasteful. About 2/3 of the energy we put into those turbines is lost as waste heat. So what the environment cares about is source energy. What you pay for is directly pay for is the site energy. So there's a big difference. And I'll be illustrating that with my house, which we did a nice renovation on 12 years ago, which was before I should have done it. Our focus was on aesthetics, and this was back when I was still into faith-based sustainability, so I used a bunch of green products, but we ended up with a very beautiful house that doesn't perform as well as it should. But it's going to be another 40, 50 years before we renovate it again. So we've locked in some poor performance, which is a really critical thing to remember when you're considering a major renovation or new construction. You're locking in that performance. We cannot do incremental improvements with our buildings the way we can with vehicles. For instance, the vehicle fleet changes over every 10, 11 years or so. The building fleet, so to speak, changes over every 100 years, at least in the residential market, if that. So here's two lines. The bottom line is site energy. The top line is primary energy, source energy, just to illustrate the difference. Remember, it's the environment cares about the upper line. So when I realized we had just renovated a not super good performing house, we were able to, we've been able over time to reduce the consumption. This is a rolling average. At the beginning, the lines are farther apart because we were using more electricity than we needed to, and through a variety of mechanisms we've been able to use to bring down the electrical usage. But the basic fact is we can't improve the heating performance, because the heating performance depends not, to a certain extent on occupant behavior, but mostly on the quality of the building enclosure, which is very difficult to improve at this point. Here's some factors, and that difference between grid electricity and PV electricity is really important to remember. This is why PV is such a critical component for zero net energy homes from a source energy point of view. But we have to be careful without PV. We have to be careful when we talk about fuel switches between natural gas and electricity. Partly because grid electricity does have such a high primary energy factor. What these numbers mean is you multiply the kilowatt hours on your electric bill by 3.34, and that's the amount of energy you're really consuming from an environmental point of view. So that's a pretty big factor, and that plays a role in this next case study, which was a basement renovation we did, where the basement was used to store stuff, and they wanted to turn it into living space. And we did a nice renovation, tried to do it in a very green way, and measured the actual performance. So the red line is how it would have performed had we done no work. We did a variety of analyses, and we extrapolate, okay, if we had done no work, the red line is how it would have performed in terms of gas usage. The blue line is how it actually performed in terms of gas usage. So it looks pretty good, right? You bet. However, we put a heat pump in the basement, a mini split for heating and cooling, and they come with these remotes. And it was a playroom, and the remote control got stuck underneath a sofa cushion for about 6 months, and that's the electrical usage. Red is if we had done no work, blue is the actual. So when you convert this gas and electricity to primary energy, to source energy, we find that the net effect of our green renovation was an increase in primary energy usage. We can fix some of that by pulling the remote control out from underneath the sofa cushion, but only so much of it. So I want to do another another case study, which is a retrofit we did in Framingham, where we took an existing ranch, wrapped it with foam, super insulated it, put PV on the roof, and we're very, very close to zero net energy there. Here's the performance numbers there. Red is if we had done no work. Blue, again, is the actual performance. You can see this from the rolling monthly average that we're definitely maybe leveling out at slightly net energy positive. So that's the energy required to operate the building. Let's look at the energy required to do the project. And I split it up into 4 categories. The blue is the embodied energy of the materials to do the project, the insulation, the heat pump, the ventilation equipment, the ductwork. The pink is the transportation energy required to get the crew to the job site and back home at the end of each day. This is an argument for affordable housing, if there is any. You know, rising housing prices are forcing tradespeople to live farther and farther away from where they work. This was alarming to me to find that getting the crew to the job site, this isn't even materials. The materials part is in the blue. So the green is the embodied energy of the PV panels, and there's a tiny little wedge at the top, which is the PV crew travel, because it only takes them a couple days to install the panels. Here it is. Here's those same numbers in terms of BTUs. So let's look at that PV a little bit. And this is a map of carbon flows, global carbon flows. The biggest carbon flow, this isn't really a big surprise, is from China to the United States. So those PV panels on our zero net energy, near zero net energy retrofit, this is kind of what they look like in China. Not quite as attractive. So we have to think not just about the operating energy once the project's completed, but the context for that. And I just want to close with a quick case study of a school retrofit, because I know that's near and dear to the hearts of Lexington. And this is what it looks like now. Really beautiful retrofit. They had a bulletin board with pictures of the project. So I took the pre-project photos, took photos of photos for that, but you can see on the top, it's a 1970s ugly concrete construction. And how they retrofitted it was by building these panels, these massive panels, super insulated panels with great glass, and applying them to the outside. So you can see the concrete columns painted orange on the inside, and then the wood panels retrofitted on the outside. It's just a fantastically beautiful school. They do this passive ventilation. You see there's 2 locks there. That's so that they can lock the classroom door in a slightly open position, and then night flush. You know, use convective looping and airflow through a central corridor here, and those skylights open up so they can get some flow at night to cool it off at night. They have lower humidity there than we do here, so they can get away with things like that. Each classroom has its own heat recovery ventilation system, and you can see the grills integrated into the architecture. That's sort of a blurry picture, but that's the new boiler, which is a pellet boiler. Austria has 8 million people. It's about 75% forested. In a 10-year effort, they converted from 97% fuel oil to 97% biomass, using local biomass. They reduced the heating consumption of the school by 90%, almost exactly 90%. They meet the remaining load with pellets that they get within about a 25-mile radius. They have a few of these radiators throughout the building, not very many at all. And what's even better is that this is the panel production facility, which is 500 meters from the school. And it has no heating system. Through passive solar design and ground coupling, without a heating system, this building never gets colder than 55 degrees or warmer than 80 degrees, which wouldn't work for an office, but for a production facility is fine. So this school was retrofitted to be carbon neutral, to use 10% of the energy it used to, and the transportation energy was next to nothing because of a number of things that came into place. But this is just an example of thinking about systems, thinking about buildings in their overall context. And I just want to encourage you to do that as we go through the day. You know, these buildings do not exist in isolation. They exist in a context, and we need to be thinking about the context.